We'll get it brought up to speed here. All right, good deal. Well, listen, welcome everyone to our weekly Bible study. It's been a joy. We are about 1/3 of the way through my slides, which means at the rate we're going, sometime next year we might get done. But we're not worried about how fast we get through it. We just want to make sure we learn something along the way and be reminded of what God has revealed to us and reveals through His Word into our lives. So let's go ahead and get started. Kind of do a quick update. Where we left last week was that we have Moses coming in the picture. Prior to Moses, many years, hundreds of years earlier, Jacob and his family of around 70, that included his sons and their families, but 70 made their way down into Egypt. Why? Because of a famine. Famine was something that was very common in that part of the world. And we've already seen on 3 different occasions how the famine impacted people who lived in the Levant area, or what we call the Promised Land, Canaan, Palestine, that whole area there in the Middle East. So Jacob and his family move into Egypt, and they stay there beyond just the fact that the famine finally breaks, and they just make themselves at home. Um, During this period, there is a group of people that are ruling, or at least giving influence into what's happening inside of Egypt. We call them the Hyksos, Hyksos, Hyksos. They were Middle Easterners. They were either of the Canaanite or the Amorite family. And so they would have been distant cousins. At least the Amorites were distant cousins to the Hebrews. And they were in control of the area, whether they were requiring Egypt to pay tribute and to pay taxes, or they actually had taken over the throne. It's not totally clear. But the point is that there was a group of people in power that were very open to having the Hebrews in their land. And so over time, over a few hundred years, those 70 people grow into hundreds of thousands of people. And the day came, and the Bible puts it this way: there arose a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. That's a nice way of saying is that the people that were in charge, the dynasty that was there in Egypt, was removed. Whether they were kicked out, we don't know the circumstances of that, but they were removed, and now a new dynasty comes up of Egyptians that did not know the story, did not have affinity or any connections to the Hebrews. This creates a problem. Prior to this, it's not an issue because the ruling party or the ruling dynasty was open and friendly to this growing minority within the land. But now that the Egyptians have basically taken over their own destiny, they now are threatened by this very large and expanding minority at the northern part of their empire. And so in order to deal with that, they subjugated or put these people into slavery. We know from even the Egyptian history itself that many of the building projects that were going on, like the pyramids and palaces and cities, many of them were built on the backs of these slaves, the Hebrews. Now, we know from scripture that the Hebrews are in Egypt about 400 years, but only about 150 of that are where they're actually slaves. So they're, for at least a couple hundred years, things are going well, they're growing. And again, a new dynasty comes up, and now we've got an issue. Slavery takes place. Slavery didn't do everything that the new rulers wanted. And so they realized that they needed to get rid of this expanding, growing population without losing their workforce. And so they did it by having the midwives because there were no hospitals at that point, that the midwives who were delivering the Hebrew babies, if it was a male, they were to basically snuff out its life. Moses is born in this atmosphere, an atmosphere of oppression, atmosphere of heartache, pain, and fear. And so Moses' mom has this child, does not, and whether they did it without a midwife, whether they somehow convinced the midwife to allow the child to be born, we don't know the details of it, but Moses is now born, and you can't keep a baby from crying. And if a baby is crying, it draws attention. And so she needed to do something. And so she hid this infant baby. Now, I believe in my own heart that the mother was very strategic. I imagine she placed the baby in this little woven basket in a place where she knew that Egyptian women came down to either to do bathing, which was the primary reason for doing it, or just coming down to the shore because she wanted her child to live. She never imagined that it would be Pharaoh's daughter unless they knew there was a location where Pharaoh's daughter came on a regular basis to bathe and to come to the Nile River shore. So I believe she was strategic in where she placed Moses. She second was strategic in that she placed Moses' older sister, Miriam, as a lookout so that whoever came, she could basically come and reconnect the mother to the baby. Now, why is that so? It was a very common practice that people who had children didn't necessarily wean their own children, didn't necessarily feed their own children. Many times there were other, maybe slaves that did it for the wealthy people of their day. And so it was not an uncommon practice, and it would not have shocked the daughter of Pharaoh for Miriam to come and basically say, I know of a person, a Hebrew lady, that can take care of this child during this early infant period of when the child is being weaned. And so Moses' mom gets to raise her own son, at least for the first 5 to 8 years, depending on how long the weaning process was. At the end of that period, goes back, and this is where we ended it last time, and it speaks to the power of those early years because later on, 40 years later, to be exact, when Moses is confronted with a situation, he is reminded of his heritage. He knows he's not an Egyptian. He knows he's a Hebrew. He identifies with them. Where did that come from? He wasn't educated that in the Egyptian school system. That would have come from his mom in those early years, as she probably told him stories and share with them about God and his faithfulness to the people, And so we see the influence of a mom. Well, at the end of those 5 to 8 years, Moses now goes back into Pharaoh's household. He's raised in a court. It probably was a large court. There were probably many children in it. He wasn't the only boy in this household because typically pharaohs and kings at that time had many wives, and so they would have many, many children. But what was interesting was he was raised in the basically the pinnacle of the education and culture of his day. He had access for 40 years where he dressed and he learned the language and he learned the culture. He learned history. He learned the things that they taught within the educational system of his day. But a day came at the age of 40 when he's out, probably as part of his job now, to look and see what's happening in the land, to see how the building projects are progressing. And he sees something that breaks his heart. He sees an Egyptian soldier captor beating a Hebrew slave. Maybe they weren't working fast enough, don't know the details, but all of a sudden he becomes enraged. Now, where did that come from? It came from the fact that he knew that he was a Hebrew. It was his people. And even though he was in Pharaoh's court, there was an affinity all of a sudden that he identified with this person that was being beaten by the Egyptian captor. And he just loses it, and he kills the Egyptian captor for the cruelty that was being placed upon this slave. Now, why did Moses do that? One, because he connected with the people. Two, obviously, he felt that this was unjust what was taking place. But three, and I believe in my heart, he thought he had been raised by his mom, that he was special, that God had a plan for his life. And all of a sudden, he's putting two and two together and thinking, is this what I've been raised to do? Is this why I'm here? Has God placed me in this place so that I might be an instrument to help my people? Problem was, it was not in God's timing. Problem was, the people didn't accept it. This was no Spartacus situation where the Spartacus rises up and all of a sudden the slaves rally behind him and create problems for the Roman Empire. No, this is no Spartacus moment. He does this great deed, and instead of the people rallying behind him, they say, "What did you do to us? You're going to make life more difficult for us." And all of a sudden, Moses is in a dilemma. He can't really go back home, and the people he thought would rally behind him so that he could deliver them, they want nothing to do with him. And so he truly is a man without a country. And so he flees for his life to the backside, really the backside of the desert. In a few slides, I'll show you a map that shows you how backside of the desert he went to, because he's running for his life. He thought that he was God's answer to the situation, and he was, but it was not in God's timing. God had some other things he wanted to teach Moses before he was ready to lead this growing, expanding population of Hebrews. So he flees out in the desert. He gets out there, and there's literally no one out there except snakes and scorpions and sand and some isolated people groups. He runs into a group of Midianites. These are distant cousins of the Hebrews. They came through Lot. Okay, Lot's line was the one of his grandkids was the father of the Midianites, and he's befriended by this man who's the priest, kind of the elder, the senior elder of this group of people, named Jethro. Jethro has a daughter and named Zipporah, and so Moses, who's now 40 years of age, marries a Midianite, a distant cousin, not a Hebrew, but a distant cousin of the Hebrews. That will come back later to create a problem for Moses when we get into the actual Exodus that takes place. So now he's married, probably having a family. He's living with the Midianites, with Jethro and his clan. And what's he going to do? He's been raised in the finest of finest. He's had the finest food. Now he's probably got a very limited diet and probably not that appetizing as well. What's he going to do? So he takes on the role of working for his father-in-law and tending sheep. And so for 40 years, he goes through the desert looking for places where there was enough grass to feed the sheep. The day comes when he's out there that he sees a burning bush, and you know the story of the burning bush. I imagine this. He's sitting there, just another day, another hot day, making sure the sheep were not getting themselves into trouble. And he sees a bush that's burning. It wasn't an uncommon thing. This was not a tall bush. There was a kind of a scrubby plant in the desert area. But as he kind of glances at it, doesn't pay attention, but he notices that it's not being consumed. There was something different. So I imagine he got up and he walked around and he realized that something was extraordinary about this situation. And all of a sudden, he hears a voice coming from the bush. And he enters into a dialogue with God. And God says, Moses, I think you're ready. 40 years. Now, these are my lines. I have no idea the specific words, but here's what I imagine if I was creating the dialogue. Moses, you thought 40 years ago you were ready to lead your people out of Egypt, but it didn't happen. There were things you needed to learn before you were going to be effective in leading what now is a large, large group of people through this desert back to their homeland. What did he need to learn? He probably needed to learn humility. He needed to learn to rely on God and not on his environment and the things around him. There was much, I think, the sheep taught him, because the sheep are very stubborn. They're not the smartest animals in the world. You're always having to kind of watch over them. And it can be a tedious task. And that's exactly what Moses was going to be confronted with. What his preparation in Egypt prepared him for didn't fully complete his education of what was needed to lead a group of people through the desert. Well, God says, now I think you're ready. First question or first pushback from Moses is, who am I? I'm nothing. And God doesn't say, hey, I disagree with you. He basically says, the issue is not you, Moses. I will be with you. And it's an incredible lesson that all of us need to learn. I don't care what our history is. I don't care how talented we've been. I don't care what our accomplishments might have been. The fact is that we bring nothing to God that just says, wow, God, you really need this in the kingdom, because it's not about us. It's about God working through us that we can accomplish anything that has eternal, lasting value. Moses had to learn that lesson. It wasn't about him. I, God said, will be with you. Second, well, who do I tell the people sent me? Because when I tried to lead them 40 years ago, that didn't go well. So why is it going to be different this time? And God says, you tell them that I am who I am has sent you. Now, this is the present tense of the verb. And basically what God was saying to him is, say the eternal one, the eternal one. Now we call him God, but the eternal one, the creative one. And they would have understood that from the stories passed down from their forefathers. The I am is here. I am. See, God is the God of the present. He's not the God of the past, although God works in our past. He's not the God of the future, although God prepares us for a future. God is interested in our lives today. I am that I am. The third thing was, but they're not going to believe me. They didn't believe me last time. Why are they going to believe me this time? So he performs a miracle. He has Moses throw down his rod, which was a stick that anyone who traveled through the desert had. It allowed you to keep the scorpions away. It allowed you to keep the snakes away. It also allowed him to help with the shepherds, because typically there would be a little hook on it where he could capture the sheep that were not listening and getting into trouble. He takes that rod, throws it down, and it turns into a snake. Then he says, pick it up. Now, I've not grown up in the desert. I've been to the desert, but I've been around snakes. Don't like snakes. I'm kind of like Indiana Jones. I hate snakes. And he said, and so, but I do know this: you don't go and try to pick up a snake unless you know what you're doing or you're crazy. But Moses does it out of obedience to God, and it turns back to a miracle, not something that normally happens. And then finally, Moses gives us his last shot of trying to say, I'm not really the person for this job. He says, I'm not eloquent. Now, some people think he had a speech impediment. I personally think it was something simpler than that. I believe after 40 years in the desert, he lost his self-confidence. He's trying to imagine what now a person who's been a shepherd for 40 years, how that's going to look and how that's going to work coming into the throne room of Pharaoh, even if he would let him in. And so he says, I'm not eloquent. I really can't do this. I don't know how to present an argument. I wasn't on the debate team. Guy gets a little frustrated, but he gives him Aaron. So I learned some things from this little exchange between God and Moses. Number one, it's not about us. It's about God. And he's the God that cares about us today. He's the God that will perform the miracles that we need in our lives. Sometimes it's the miracle of peace when there's so much churning going around us. Sometimes it's the miracle of joy in the midst of heartache, the joy, that a satisfaction that comes to know that God loves us. And then he brought Aaron into his life to help him so he did not have to travel this journey in going and meeting with Pharaoh. Let's continue the story. Now, I told you earlier at the very beginning that when Moses went into Pharaoh's household, that there were probably many boys there. There were many that were potential heirs to the throne. And there seems to be strong evidence, the fact that the Pharaoh of the Exodus was probably somebody that Moses knew. Here's how I picture it in my mind. Moses and Aaron come in, and of course, you just couldn't, open the doors and go see the president or see the Pharaoh. Okay. You got to basically come by invitation only. And so why would Pharaoh want to even meet with Moses? I have a sneaking suspicion that they knew each other back from their childhood. Remember, Moses had grown, he'd been 40 years in the household. And so his interactions with the other children and then adults in the household would have been there for 40 years. And even though 40 years had passed, there still was a memory of this Moses. And so I imagine Pharaoh met with him, as was willing to meet with him, for two reasons. One, he couldn't believe that Moses would come back home after what he had done 40 years earlier. And two, might have been because he was interested to see what had become of this person that maybe was a playmate of his when they were children. Whatever it is, he is able to come in, and we know what happens. Moses says, my people, I want to take the Hebrews and we want to go off and worship God for 3 days. Pharaoh said, no way. I got a limitless, almost a limitless workforce here. I'm not having to pay for it. Why am I going to let you take 3 days and have all the work shut down? No. And it led to these plagues. We call them the 10 plagues, because there was this going back and forth about letting the people go. And the first plague was turning water into blood, okay, blood-like. Then the frogs coming out of the water, then gnats and flies. And you can see there in the little diagram all the 10 plagues. Now, most of the plagues, not all of them, but most of the plagues can be explained by some natural phenomena, which raises an interesting question. If I can explain the plagues by natural phenomena, does that mean that God wasn't involved? And I scratch my head when I hear people who say, well, if it can be explained, then we don't need God. Hey, it happened when God wanted it to happen. It happened to accomplish a purpose. And so whether God uses the forces of nature that he created or he supernaturally created them, it doesn't really matter to me. How he did it is not the issue. The issue is it happened because he wanted it to happen, because he had a purpose in it happening. And I've given to you in the sub-bullets there 2 natural explanations that would explain most, as I said, not all of the plagues. For example, during this period, there was heavy rains that came that washed this red clay. If you're from Georgia or that part of the country, you've seen red clay, and the red clay gets into the water and you get enough of it, and all of a sudden that water turns red. Hey, but then because of the murkiness of the water, all of a sudden animals like frogs flee. And it led to a lot of this taking place. Or also during this period, there was a major, had a huge impact on this whole region of the globe, major volcano near Greece that took place that had an impact even all the way down into Egypt. The only reason why I bring this up is that when people read about that in a Reader's Digest article or something like that, they say, see, there was no God. But God used it. And by the way, these 2 explanations do not explain all 10 of the plagues. There were some that only could be explained by God's supernatural intervention. What was interesting, though, to me, not so much about the how it was done, but the fact is almost all of these plagues, again, not all of them, but almost all of these plagues, particularly the one on darkness, plague number 9, challenged the very deities of Egypt. The biggest deity within Egypt, the one that was worshipped, was a sun god. And the Pharaoh considered himself the son of that sun god. And so when darkness came, it was a challenge to that deity. Well, eventually we get to the 10th plague. The people of Egypt are frustrated, but Pharaoh is not giving in. He needs this workforce to build all of his great structures that he wanted built. And so Moses is told to prepare for this final plague that's coming. He says, I want you, every family, to take an innocent lamb and slay the lamb, take the blood of the lamb and put it on the lintel, the doorposts of every home. This imagery of an innocent lamb being slain in order to save people started all the way back in Genesis chapter 3, when God slew an innocent lamb, and in this case allowed covering for Adam and Eve. And the Jews to this day celebrate Passover because this was the beginning of the celebration of Passover. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, God said with the death angel. The death angel would pass over wherever there was blood. And this is why, in our sophisticated culture, and again, don't know why God chose this path. I just know he did. And it teaches us this valuable lesson on the importance of that the life is in the blood. And so when Jesus died on the cross, he shed his blood. Why? Because you and I needed someone to take care of our sin, our self-centeredness, our rebellious attitude towards our Creator God. And so we see the imagery of that all the way back here in this Passover. At this point, once that takes place and the firstborn in households throughout the Egyptian empire die, or at least in Egypt die, at this point, Pharaoh says, I've had enough. And the people probably said, I have enough. Now, something happens before they actually get out of the country. Something that, we don't talk a lot about, but it's interesting because it explains how in the world the Hebrews had these materials that they would later use to build the tabernacle. And so it appears that they went to their neighbors, their Egyptian neighbors, and they basically said, we're leaving. Can you give us something to take with us that will help us in our journey? And at this point, the Egyptians wanted to get rid of them so bad because these plagues had basically been a nightmare for, we don't know, weeks, months. We don't know how long they lasted. And so they gave them their gold, their silver, their fine linens. They gave them these things that later would be used to help build the tabernacle in the wilderness. Very interesting thing. God then they move out. And of course, you know the story about crossing the Red Sea and God performing a miracle there. And instead of going the short distance back home, they go the long distance down into the peninsula, the desert peninsula. And the scripture tells us that God did this, I think, for two reasons. One, to protect them from the outposts, the Egyptian outposts that possibly could create problems for them. It's hard to hide 2+ million people because that's what left Egypt. It's hard to hide. And so in order to protect them, but also to test them, to really find out what they're made out of, God sends them down into the desert. He leads them by day by a pillar of cloud and by night a pillar of fire. And it takes 3 months for them to get down to Mount Sinai. In those 3 months of traveling, the true character and heart of the people, Hebrew people, the ones that God chose, the ones that God selected from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and now these are the descendants of those patriarchs, that they were a stubborn, rebellious lot, a lot like sheep. They were not content. They didn't trust God. And when they did, they would forget it shortly thereafter. We see this in some of the events that takes place with the manna. They were complaining about the lack of food, and God brings them manna, which means in the Hebrew, what is it? It wasn't something they'd ever seen before. It didn't look like the leeks and the onions of Egypt that they were now, missing. Okay. They were actually wanting to go back into captivity because they said, at least we had food. We don't have food here. And God miraculously provides them food that's going to last them for the next 40 years. The quail, because it gave meat. When they didn't have water, Moses hit a rock and water comes. In other words, God was providing for them. But rather than asking of God to help them, they would always whine and complain to Moses. Can you imagine what kind of character Moses was to listen to this day in and day out? Not just a few people, but literally hundreds and thousands of people just whining and complaining about their lot in life. Prior to them reaching where they were wanting to go, Moses was taking them, he is confronted by his father-in-law, Jethro. Jethro comes out because where's Moses taking them? He's taking them down to the land where he saw the burning bush. It's a land that's at the foothills or at the base of a mountain range that has Mount Horeb, or as we call it, Mount Sinai. So he's going back to territory that he had been for the last 40 years, where his father-in-law lived. So I imagine word got to Jethro that Moses was bringing his family. Now, how would you like to say, hey, the family's coming over for dinner? And then all of a sudden see 2 million people. Well, Jethro goes and he greets them. And we'll come back to this, but that meeting is a very important part in Moses' development as a leader. And it's something that even as I teach leadership, as I observe leadership, I still see as a problem in so many of our leaders today. But we'll come back to that before we leave today. Let's move on. Here's the map that shows where they could have gone and the path that they actually pursued. This land of Goshen here up in the delta of the Nile, that's where the Hebrews lived. They could have taken this dotted line called the way to the land of the Philistines. That would have been the shortest way. That was a major caravan route from Egypt to the Fertile Crescent, all the way over into the Babylonian, Assyrian territory. They could have taken a southerly route called the way to Shur, which again was a road that took you up into the middle part of the land that the Hebrews were from. But instead, he takes them south. He takes them south towards Mount Sinai at the very base. I mean, literally out in the middle of nowhere. And yet this is where God is going to meet them, and God is going to teach them some things that are going to lay the foundation will help them become a nation, a people of God. Let me just pause there before I move to the next slide and talk about the crossing of the Red Sea. Most of you have probably seen the 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston raising his arms, and all of a sudden the water stopped, and you got these gigantic walls of water held back as the children of Israel crossed over. The reality is that probably the waters where they passed weren't that deep. Some people have said they marched through a marshy area. And again, people have said, see, there's no way that God could have perform this great miracle, because it was just a marsh. They could have waded themselves across this marshy area. And I always say, you know what? Whether it was a tall water like Charlton Heston and the 10 Commandments, or it was going through the marsh, here's what I do know. Number one, that it was dry enough for them to walk across. And number two, is God able to destroy a whole army that was chasing them with only this much water. So I don't care whether the water is 6 feet deep or 6 inches deep. There was a miracle that took place that God enabled them to cross and basically cut off the army that was advancing after them. Again, the people experience the provisions of God and the intervention of God and a miracle of God. They rejoice, but their memories were real bad. It's kind of like as we get older, we have short-term memory loss. Well, listen, the children of Israel, they lived the whole 40 years with short memory loss because they kept forgetting about what God had done. Now they get to Mount Sinai. It's taken him 3 months to get there. And when he gets there, there is this mountain. And on the top of the mountain is this fire and lightning and thunder and taking place. It intimidated the people that wanted nothing to do with interacting with God. So they sent Moses up, and Moses goes up and he dialogues with God. And he's given the 10 commandments. He's giving other aspects of the law. He's given instructions on how a place where they could meet God as a place of worship. So Sinai becomes very important because it lays the foundation for their identity as a people in terms of their worship, as well as the rules that govern their life or the laws. Moses comes down 40 days after he goes up there. And when he comes down, he is appalled by what he sees because the children of Israel got nervous. They thought something had happened to Moses. And people like to be able to worship something they can see. And it's tough to worship an invisible God. And so, having come out of Egypt, they were familiar with the Egyptians' form of worship of many deities. And one of the things that were part of their worship was the bull. And I've given a picture there. I don't know if you can see it. It's probably small on your screens. And if you have a chance to look at it, get up close, it's a picture, it's an engraving that they found in Egypt of one of their gods. But there are two aspects to this god. There's the bull, and then on the head between the horns is a sun, which was for the worship of the sun god, Ra, took place. So the bull really wasn't the idol. It wasn't really the god. It was the carrier of the god. And I think in my own understanding, and again, I'm not sure that I'm absolutely correct here, but I have a strong suspicion that what the children of Israel did is they kind of integrated their belief in God because they had been raised about this God, this Jehovah that had called out Abraham. And so they were God's chosen people, but they mingled it or mixed it up with something that they had lived with for 400 years. And that's what they saw in Egypt. And so they probably did not have the sun on the head. They probably just made a idol of the bull or the calf, as the Bible calls it. Okay, with the idea that the invisible God rode on the back of this bull. Again, integrating two different diametrically opposed ways of religious thinking. Well, Moses is furious. He's furious for a second because when he saw their behavior around the calf, he knew that the people had adopted something that they had seen again for generations in Egypt, because as part of the celebration to the god, the Ra, who sat on a bull, they would have these incredibly emotional dances. It's kind of like Mardi Gras in New Orleans. And that's how the people, it was a frenzy that took place. And we see this in many different cultures where there's such an intensity in their worship that they drive themselves into this intense emotional thing. And when Moses comes down, he sees the people just dancing. And, it wasn't just it wasn't a waltz. This was a dance of frenzy, similar to what he had seen in Egypt. He goes ballistic because the people had already forgotten. And so he destroys the calf and judgment takes place. Well, he goes back up the mountain. He gets the 10 commandments again, because remember, he broke the first tablets. He was so livid with what he saw. When he comes back down, he then instructs the people. He gives them the law, teaches them the law, and they build the picture, and I have down here, of the tabernacle. It's the temple, the portable temple. Where did they get the materials for that portable temple? The Egyptians had given it to them, the gold, silver, the bronze, copper, other materials that were used in the building of this temple were given to them by the Egyptians when they were leaving Egypt. So let's close with this slide. What did they learn in this whole Exodus experience? Number one, they learned the concept of the Passover, that Jesus will eventually become the ultimate Passover for those of us who are Christians. But to the Jew, this idea that God redeemed them, God delivered them from their slavery and from their sin. This is the idea of the Exodus, and it's a theme that you see throughout the Old and into the New Testament. Second lesson we learned was the lesson that Jethro, the father-in-law, taught Moses. Remember, I told you that on their way to Mount Sinai, Jethro comes out to greet Moses, and he observes his son-in-law working. And notice that from sunup to sundown, Moses spends all of his time solving people's problems. Day in, day out. Moses, do you do this every day? Dad, the needs are so great. And Jethro goes, Moses, this is not good. This is not good for you, and it's not good for the people. And it's a burden on you. The actual Bible says it's a burden on you, and it's a burden on the people. You must learn how to share responsibility. And so he told them, he says, select wise people within each of the 12 tribes, have them deal with the petty, small issues. And if they can't solve those issues, and they're much bigger, then those are the only issues that come to you. In other words, he's delegating some of the responsibility. Great leaders are not people who know how to do the work. They know how to motivate, encourage, and delegate work so that their efforts are multiplied by hundreds and thousands. A good president is not that he knows how to do everything. He knows how to lead people who can get something done. That's delegation. That's discipleship. Sharing the load. And that's the only way Moses was going to survive for the next 40 years. So he took the advice of his father-in-law. He implemented it. The third lesson we learn as we close today is he learned the idea of once we're redeemed, once we've been delivered, there needs to be a consecration. There needs to be a decision made on how we're going to live. So yes, now we're free from Egypt, but how are we going to live? And this is where the law came in, because the law made the Hebrews unique in their world. In fact, those who study history say there's no law like it. The closest we have is what England eventually implemented and the United States eventually implemented. In our law system, we see elements that come right out of the law of the Old Testament. It made for unique. It basically limited how people could be punished for things, because that's not how people lived. You know, if you stole something, I might kill you. The law said you can't do that. You know, it's an eye for an eye. It has to be equivalent to the crime that's been committed. It can't be greater than the crime that's been committed. That's an aspect of the law that was foreign in the world in which the Hebrews were living at that time. We call that consecration. This basically says, God, thank you for delivering me. How do I live? How should I then live? And this is where holiness comes in. Holiness is not that the vessel is so great, it's that the vessel has a purpose that brings honor to God. That's what makes it holy. That's what makes you and I holy. We're not holy because we're perfect. We're not holy because we're so talented and smart and everything else. We're holy because God has called us to be followers of him, followers of Jesus. And as we're followers of Jesus, that's what makes us. It's Jesus' holiness. It's Jesus' righteousness. It's not my own. It's what I've been set apart to do. I've been set apart in a way to love God and to worship God and to adore God. Am I perfect in how I do that? Absolutely not. But my holiness is not dictated about how perfect I am. My holiness is based on the fact that I have a friend, a savior, Jesus Christ. So those are the lessons we learn from this part. Next week, we'll pick up as they pick up their bags and they start heading towards the promised land. Now that they have the law, now that they have the temple, they've made some corrections. Now let's see how the people progress over these next few months or weeks as they travel north to the promised land. Let's pray as we conclude today. Father, we thank you for that you've called us and set us apart. We're unique not because we're odd. We're not unique because we're so smart or so talented. We're unique because, Lord, you've called us to a higher purpose than ourselves. And I thank you for that. And as we fulfill that, as I fulfill that purpose, Lord, there's meaning and purpose in this life. That's what you meant, Jesus, when you said you've come that we might have life, life abundant, life with purpose, life with meaning. Following you, Lord, gives me that purpose and meaning, even though things around me may be falling apart. In you, I find meaning and purpose. I pray, Lord, for all of my friends that you'll be with them. Protect us, Lord, keep us safe. For those who are struggling in health, I pray, Lord, that you give them strength and grace today. For we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, God bless you all. Have a great day, and we will see you next week on Thursday. Blessings.
Thanks, Dwayne.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, guys. We have our tech group starting at 2:00 Central Time, 3:00 Eastern. Join back, and we'll start on that. Bye, guys.